Okay, can Illinois ban assault style weapons, right? So we're talking about another civics question that's worth asking. And this question, of course, is back in the news because Illinois has a statewide ban that was recently upheld by a federal appeals court, while the U.S. Supreme Court is preparing to review a related ban in the Chicago area. So this is not just a gun policy question, it's a civics question about state power and constitutional rights and how courts actually decide where that line is. Illinois passed the Illinois Protect Illinois Communities Act in 2023 after the Highland Park shooting at the 4th of July parade. Now, the law regulates assault weapons, large capacity magazines, and then certain attachments to firearms. And supporters argue that the law is a public safety measure that's meant to reduce the damage caused by mass shootings. Now, opponents, of course, are arguing that it violates the Second Amendment to the federal Constitution by banning firearms that many Americans commonly own. And this is where the constitutional issue begins. The Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms, but like most constitutional rights, it is not unlimited. There was a Supreme Court case, District of Columbia v. Heller, and in this case, the Supreme Court said the Second Amendment protects an individual right to possess firearms, especially for self-defense in the home. But the court also said that the right does not protect every weapon in every place for every purpose. Then you move on to it's New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin. And in this case, the Supreme Court said modern gun regulations must be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. And that particular test has changed how courts look at gun laws. Instead of asking only whether a law seems reasonable for public safety, courts now ask whether the government can point to historical examples or traditions that happen to support that kind of regulation. And this is why assault-style weapons bans are being challenged all around the country. And so this debate, the debate almost always takes two different directions. It asks two questions. One is, are AR-15 style rifles and similar firearms commonly used by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes? Or are they unusually dangerous weapons that the government may restrict? Different courts have answered those questions differently. But recently, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the Illinois law. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a challenge involving the Cook County ban, and that decision could affect Illinois' statewide law and then also similar laws across the country. So, long and the short of it here, can Illinois ban assault-style weapons? For now, yes, the Illinois law does remain in effect. But whether it ultimately survives really depends on how the Supreme Court applies the Second Amendment. And so the civics lesson comes down to this. States have police power to protect public safety. Individuals have constitutional rights that states cannot ignore. And the courts decide whether a law crosses that constitutional line. That's called judicial review. Now, that does not answer every policy argument that happens to arise, because people can blame whether bans work, whether they go too far, whether they actually protect communities, or whether they burden lawful gun owners. But the thing is, outside of that argument, if we look at the constitutional question, that constitutional question is much narrower. And it comes down to this. Does the law fit within the Second Amendment as the Supreme Court now understands it? So this was one of those civics questions I thought was worth asking. And like I said, as a high school teacher, I'm sure this one will come up in the classroom too as we talk about different rights that we happen to possess. I happen to be a gun owner myself. I have a FOID card here in Illinois. Not all the states have those, right? But yeah, so I can understand why it's important to uphold the Second Amendment, but I can also understand the importance of doing what's best for public safety. So anyway, thanks for hanging around. I look forward to the comments on this one.